What if I told you that one man hijacked a plane, stole $200,000, jumped into a storm at 10,000 feet, and was never seen again? It sounds impossible, like something straight out of a Hollywood movie. But on November 24th, 1971, it actually happened. And more than 50 years later, nobody knows who he was, nobody knows where he went, and nobody knows whether he survived. This is the story of D.B. Cooper, the man who may have committed the perfect crime. It was the day before Thanksgiving. At Portland International Airport, a middle-aged man walked calmly through the terminal. Nothing about him seemed suspicious. He wasn't wearing a mask. He wasn't hiding his face. He wasn't acting nervous. In fact, he looked like an ordinary businessman. He wore a dark suit, a white shirt, a black tie, and carried a simple black briefcase. He walked up to the ticket counter and purchased a one-way ticket to Seattle. The name he used was Dan Cooper. The ticket cost only $20. Nobody knew it then, but that $20 ticket would become one of the most famous tickets in American history. Cooper boarded Northwest Orient Flight 305. The plane was carrying around 40 passengers. Everything seemed completely normal. People were chatting. Flight attendants were serving drinks. The engines roared as the aircraft climbed into the cloudy sky. Cooper took a seat near the rear of the plane. He ordered a bourbon whiskey, lit a cigarette, and quietly watched the world pass by outside the window. Nothing seemed unusual, at least not yet. A few minutes later, Cooper called over a flight attendant named Florence Schaffner. He handed her a folded piece of paper. At first, she didn't think much of it. She assumed it was just another businessman trying to give her his phone number. Without even reading it, she slipped it into her purse. Then Cooper leaned toward her. His voice was calm. His face showed no emotion, and he said, "Miss, you'd better read that note." The flight attendant opened the note. The words instantly froze her in place. It read, "I have a bomb." For a moment, she couldn't believe what she was reading. Then Cooper slowly opened his briefcase. Inside were red cylinders, wires, and what appeared to be an explosive device. Whether it was real or fake remains unknown to this day. But at that moment, nobody was willing to take the chance. The hijacking had begun. Cooper remained calm, almost unbelievably calm. While the rest of the crew worried about what might happen next, he sat quietly in his seat. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't threatening passengers. He wasn't acting like the criminals people usually imagined. Instead, he looked more like a businessman negotiating a deal, and that made him even more terrifying. Soon, the pilots contacted air traffic control. Within minutes, the FBI, local police, and airline officials were involved. The message was clear. A passenger was claiming to have a bomb, and he wanted $200,000. As Flight 305 continued towards Seattle, authorities raced against time. Back in 1971, $200,000 was a huge amount of money, equivalent to more than $1 million today. But officials had no choice. There were dozens of innocent lives on that aircraft. The money had to be delivered. For nearly 2 hours, the plane circled in the air while authorities gathered the ransom. Meanwhile, Cooper calmly smoked cigarettes and drank bourbon. According to witnesses, he never appeared nervous, not even once. It was as if he knew exactly how the story would end. Finally, the aircraft landed at Seattle-Tacoma Airport. The runway lights glowed through the darkness. Police vehicles surrounded the area. FBI agents watched from a distance. No one wanted to make a mistake. One wrong move could cost dozens of lives. A ground crew carefully delivered the ransom money, 10,000 $20 bills, a total of $200,000, along with 4 parachutes, exactly as Cooper had demanded. The money was carried onto the aircraft. Cooper inspected it carefully. Then he did something unexpected. He released every passenger. One by one, people left the plane. Most had no idea how close they had come to disaster. Within minutes, the cabin was nearly empty. Only a few crew members remained behind. Now Cooper had exactly what he wanted: the money, the parachutes, and an airplane. But the most dangerous part of his plan was still ahead. Cooper walked into the cockpit and gave the pilots new instructions. He wanted the plane to fly toward Mexico, but under very specific conditions. The aircraft had to remain at a low altitude. The speed had to stay relatively slow, and the landing gear needed to remain partially deployed. The pilots found the instructions unusual, but Cooper seemed surprisingly knowledgeable about airplanes, almost as if he had studied them before. At 7:40 p.m., the aircraft took off once again. Outside, darkness covered the sky. Heavy rain pounded against the fuselage. Strong winds shook the aircraft. The plane headed south through one of the worst nights imaginable. Inside the cabin, Cooper began preparing. He tied the money bag to himself, examined the parachutes, and carefully planned his next move. The crew stayed in the cockpit, following his instructions. Nobody knew what he intended to do. Then, around 8 p.m., a warning light suddenly appeared. The rear staircase had been lowered. The pilots exchanged worried glances. They knew something was happening behind them, but they couldn't leave the cockpit. They had no idea whether Cooper was still on board or already gone. Minutes passed. The aircraft continued through the storm. Rain hammered the metal skin of the plane. Powerful winds howled outside, and somewhere in the darkness, D.B. Cooper stood at the rear staircase with a parachute on his back and $200,000 strapped to his body. Then he jumped into the freezing night, into heavy rain, into darkness, into one of the greatest mysteries in American history. When the aircraft finally landed in Reno, Nevada, authorities rushed aboard. FBI agents searched every corner, every seat, every compartment. But Cooper was gone, completely gone. The only things left behind were a few cigarette butts and a black tie. The man himself had vanished. The investigation began immediately, and it quickly became one of the largest manhunts in FBI history. The operation was given a name, NORJAC, short for Northwest Hijacking. Hundreds of agents joined the search. Forests were combed, mountains were explored, rivers were searched. Helicopters flew over vast areas of wilderness. Investigators followed every possible lead. But there was one major problem. Nobody even knew who D.B. Cooper really was. Dan Cooper turned out to be a fake name. The hijacker had disappeared without leaving a true identity behind. It was like chasing a ghost. Years passed, then decades. The FBI investigated hundreds of suspects. Some were former soldiers. Some were experienced parachutists. Others had criminal backgrounds. Every few years, a new theory appeared. Every few years, someone claimed to have solved the mystery, but none of them could prove it. Then, in 1980, something incredible happened. An 8-year-old boy named Brian Ingram was playing along the Columbia River. While digging in the sand, he discovered several bundles of old cash. The bills were badly damaged, but investigators quickly recognized the serial numbers. They matched the ransom money given to D.B. Cooper. For the first time in nearly a decade, the case had real evidence, but instead of answering questions, it created even more. How did the money end up there? Had Cooper survived? Had the river carried the money there? Or had someone placed it there intentionally? No one knew. As the years continued, the mystery only grew larger. Many investigators believed Cooper died during the jump. The weather was terrible, the terrain below was dangerous, and he was carrying a heavy bag of cash. Surviving seemed almost impossible, but others disagreed. They pointed out something important. Cooper seemed prepared. He understood airplanes. He knew exactly what he was doing. Maybe he wasn't an amateur. Maybe he was a trained paratrooper. Maybe the jump had been planned for months. If that's true, then perhaps D.B. Cooper landed safely. Perhaps he escaped into the wilderness. Perhaps he created a new identity. And perhaps he spent the rest of his life watching the world search for a man who no longer existed. In 2016, after 45 years of investigation, the FBI officially closed the case. No arrest, no confession, no definitive answer. More than 50 years later, one question still remains. Who was D.B. Cooper? Did he die the night he jumped into the storm? Or did he pull off the perfect crime and disappear forever? The truth may never be known, and that's exactly why the legend of D.B. Cooper refuses to die. Because on a cold November night in 1971, a man boarded a plane, stole $200,000, jumped into the darkness, and vanished without a trace, never found, never identified, never forgotten.